Uh, but maybe if somebody has a specific question, I would love to answer it. And meantime, take a sip. Um, if there's no specific question,
Oh, we got a few. Lowell or Professor Ben said. We're all muted, but yeah, we're ready. I'm sure we have a lot to talk about, and there's people in the chat that also have questions for you. But I'll Professor Ben said or Lowell, please.
Okay, since Lowell has showed his hand out toward me, I would like to ask you a question regarding the film that you made. I am from the position that films play some role, but not a big role in deliberately fighting anti-Semitism. I mean, certainly they provide awareness, they provide knowledge, and there was a whole bunch of them that have came out. Like for me, the best one, which I wrote in my Facebook, is Shoah by Claude Lanzmann. I'm not going to ask you whether you had any relationship with Claude Lanzmann, because I thought that eight-hour documentary is the must-see during Shoah Day. It's a must-see. But what you think, what is your point of view about the limitation of the films and documentaries? Because we've been doing it so much, but now anti-Semitism is rising. So we know that something is not working. So what's your thought about that?
First of all, Claude Lanzmann asked me to be his assistant when he made that great film. And I told him, Claude, I would love to be your assistant to work with you on it, but I'm making my film in Germany that in 1985. And of course, it's a great film, although I thought that technically he could have cut the Polish language, because it was very hard to sit down for 9 hours and watch that film. I mean, the eyewitnesses were fantastic. I mean, a whole bunch of them. And yeah, it is one of the best films that I can say. But I started my first film in 1985, as I said. No, actually 1980 in New York. At that time, there were hardly any films. When I made my first film in Germany, 85 still, in Germany, there were hardly any films, or maybe 3 or 4 or 5. Of course, I made them to teach the world about the Holocaust, about the Shoah, and to use it to be able to lecture using it about the Tkuma, about Israel, about Judaism today, and later on to combat anti-Semitism. And then I became eyewitness of the eyewitnesses, so I'm being invited when now the eyewitnesses are very few in number, or they are sick and they cannot appear. I'm being asked by, let's say, Zikaron Basalon, the organization that puts survivors together with people for audience. I speak, but then again, until 120, I don't know how long I'll be among us. I'm a 76-year-old, and with God's help until 120. But I think that there'll be later on, and now already, so many questions about the Holocaust. So every bit of film, especially documentary film, and I made 15 documentary films about different topics that cover the Holocaust from different sides. And I worked on 8 feature films that teach a lot about stories that we cannot find the people. One of them is about my aunt, Kathe Rund Rosenstein from Berlin, who was in the resistance against the Nazis in Berlin and was taken March 43 with the latest deportation of Jews to Auschwitz. And the film is called The Last Train, Der letzte Zug, and one could see it online. How terrible it was for the Jews, 1 week without water, food, or sanitation, and most of them didn't survive. And so, again, the other films I worked was about anti-Semitism in Germany in the 30s, leading to the Holocaust. And then again, so many of the films would be uh, uh, used to teach about it. Of course, there are so many, and I would like to see more films about Jewish culture, history, and religion. And I contributed also to it, especially in religion. That goes back to 1980 when I produced my Israeli television show in Hebrew and English in New York for all of America. I also used to interview leaders of the Jewish community of America and many rabbis to my show to talk about whatever issues were burning. And one day I invited the secretary of the Lubavitcher Rebbe from Crown Heights in Brooklyn to come and tell us what is the Rebbe doing, because he did such a great job. Until today, Chabad is doing it. So I interviewed him, and then a few hours later, he called me and said, Emanuel, the Rebbe has to see you ASAP. He wants you to teach him how do you make films, media, and television for Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael, for Jewish topics and for Israel, because Chabad would like to start making such films. So the next day, I prayed the morning prayers, Shacharit, already in 770 in Crown Heights. And then somebody took me to the Rebbe, to his office. And then he told me, Emanuel, so tell me, how do you make films? And I started talking, how do I make film, how long it takes, what it takes, how much it costs, and what are the effects of my films for Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. And then I realized I spoke 40 minutes to the Rebbe. He didn't move his eyes, he just looked at me, and I was hypnotized by his beautiful face. And but he didn't move his face and didn't ask anything, didn't hint. So I stopped after 40 minutes to see if he'll give me a signal what to do. And then he said, Emanuel, you're doing Gedolos and Tzuros for Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. You're doing great things for Jews and Israel, and you'll continue to do it. But I want you to know you'll come to an enemy land, and you'll continue with your missions over there, but the people will push you out, and they will hurt you, and they will really hurt you up to a point on a daily basis that at some point you'll get so hurt that you won't be able to stay there anymore. And he said, when they hurt you, you'll go with Hashem, with God, and God will go with you, and will be able to continue your missions until one day you won't be able anymore. And that was 1980, and I didn't know I was fighting in Syria, in Egypt, in Jordan. I didn't know which enemy land is left that he means. I didn't know. I realized 5 years later when I took the survivors from Queens, New York, to Germany and to concentration camp Theresienstadt, and then later made films, worked on 30 films, and I learned about anti-Semitism against me because I was interviewed on German television, German radio, newspapers. Everybody in Germany got to know me, and I still have in my archive bunch of letters with big swastika, more or less the text, Mr. Rand, dirty Mr. Rand, get out of our country, don't teach our kids about the Holocaust that never happened, and we'll get you, we'll kill you. And I kept going with Hashem and kept doing my things, helping young Germans with their problems, and to become our friends, and helping many Germans to become our friends, and combating anti-Semitism. Until a few years ago, I couldn't take it anymore. I went back to New York, and then to Philadelphia, and the Rebbe said whenever I come to New York, they will take care of me whenever I need, because I do Avodat Kodesh, holy work. And yeah, so that was...
My question was, I'm just wondering about why this rise of, I mean, you are aware of in 2017, the ADL published its major survey that took almost 6 years.
Right.
It was just impossible to realize the level of anti-Semitism all over the world, especially in the Islamic world, which I am from and I'm interested in. My
Right.
question to you before was, do you see any limitation to the film and documentary? Because there have been so many of them, and yet, anti-Semitism is getting even worse than before. So
Yes,
how
but
do you, well, like Lowell suggested that we need to fight it now. We arrive at a point where awareness and maybe, I'm not saying that to just disregard making film and documentary and so on, there still will be, but we should not put too much emphasis on them to curb anti-Semitism because it has not worked. So therefore, I think we need to come up with a new model of fighting, not so much fighting physically, but at least saying to people, I'm not saying like we should create like the French, what do you call it, La Ligue de, what do you call it, the League, Defense League Juive, which was really trying to help the community and save them from Arab attack and so on. Of course, they did something bad later on, but what do you think about that in terms of the limitation of films?
Well, first of all, I'll put a kushya, I'll play Bet Hillel role, and I'll say both you and me and Laurel and David and the rest of the world, we don't know how many cases of anti-Semitism people decided not to go for, people and organizations. We don't know it because those people wanted to do something anti-Semitic and they maybe possibly watched 1 or 10 films or whatever and decided no. On the contrary, maybe some of them decided to be on the side of the Jews, and they learn also from the films and from what we speak about that when people go against the Jews, then they go against the country that they are in. The people, many Muslims who come to France and Germany, they go against their own country. They go against Germany. They don't want to be Germans. They don't want to be French. And they go against their country as they go against the Jews. It's the same in America. And so we have to, yeah, of course, the films that I make show the situation, what did anti-Semitism do, and with the hope that those who watch them will decide not to do it. Of course, I cannot make films directly to anti-Semites. They wouldn't take it to start with. So I don't know if somebody knows a better solution than the 30 films that I made so far. But of course, unfortunately, I can say, unfortunately, we'll probably face anti-Semitism, or I'll put it anti-Jewish people and organizations, as long as we Jews are different, as long as we Jews succeed with whatever we do and the others get jealous. And now it becomes, of course, Israel. Israel become the number 1 or 2 or 3 in the world in so many high-tech, or you name it, in medicine and in everything. And then again, you have people who decide that Jews created the corona to be able to kill the world, and then to be able, the Jews run Pfizer, Albert Bourla, and a professor of the other company. And so you already, like in the Middle Ages, the Jews were blamed for the black Magefa, and that the Jews were poisoning the worlds or whatever. There'll be always those people, but we can minimize if we'll get those people, some of them who are maybe anti-Semites or even neo-Nazis, to go back to their Jewish roots if they can find it, because there are some neo-Nazis in Germany, in Austria, in Poland. My friend Rabbi Michael Shudrick, tells me about the Jews who actually were neo-Nazis in Poland against Jews, and somehow they found out that their grandmother was Jewish, and they became Chozrim B'Tshuva. They took back the Judaism. And so if I'll be able to get millions of those Latinos some of them are possibly anti-Semites. They'll become Jews, so whatever. But yeah, no, it's a question that there'll always be people who hate other people, who hate yellow people, so to say, will hate black people or red people. And always, there'll be Cain and Hevel. There'll be always from the Bible, we know about people who hated, from Haman, who hated the Jews in Persia 2,500 years ago, and we still commemorate it every year with the story of Esther in Purim. And yeah, but still, Jews were able to find that the descendants of this Haman who wanted to kill all the Jews in Persia, his descendants came to Bnei Brak in Israel to study in the synagogues. I did the same. I got the grandchildren of Nazis to come become students in Jewish schools, religious schools here in Jerusalem. And so, yeah, with nice work of appealing to people, telling them how terrible the Shoah was, and we want to help them not to become bad people and hate any groups. That could be, but no, but it's a good question.
I got a whole series of questions on, I guess, two different paths. One is the, so to say, the religious Jewish path view towards anti-Semitism, and then a more secular, cognitive, practical approach. And then obviously, I went to Orthodox schools, and generally, Mount Sinai, it comes from the word for hate. And when we were, so to say, chosen for the Torah, it caused all the other nations to hate us. And there's so many parts of our religion that basically canonize this concept that there's a natural inclination for anti-Semitism. Even like the local rabbi here in the yeshiva said, it's a spiritual force that causes people to hate Jews. And then even, if you're in Israel, you got probably the most extreme positions from people, people like Reb Shach and the mainstream rabbis that largely blame Jews for anti-Semitism, even the Holocaust, God forbid, I mean, just the approach as a religious man, some people call rabbi. I'm sure you've heard a lot of statements by Haredim and from our text. How do you combat that? And so I went to university. I remember in Orthodox schools, and I had non-Jewish friends, and rabbis and Hasidim in Brooklyn. They would tell you, they really hate you. God forbid. Secretly, deep down, they're anti-Semitic. I don't care if they really like you, or they appear to be nice. There's something about our religion that makes anti-Semitism logical and makes sense, and even part of our religion where a person could be, well, of course they hate us. That's part of our religion. That's part of our belief system.
You would like to know about the hate of Jews against Jews, mainly the religious ones?
Well, I'm talking about the, so to say, the Orthodox theology that anti-Semitism is caused by God. Like the famous, Mount Sinai. That Sinai means hatred. Sinai means hatred, and when we got the Torah, it caused all the other nations to hate us, and you can't really combat anti-Semitism. So I just wonder if you combat, like, as a religious Jew to other religious Jews, do you believe that anti-Semitism is a natural phenomenon that God created, or are you taking a more practical approach that there's some sort of logic and even theologically to say, anti-Semitism is a tool of God that God uses to keep us in line? And what do you say to those type theologies that are actually what I learned in Israel?
Well, I don't want to look at it this way, that it's a creation of God, but I look at it more cultural, social issues, and also competition. Sometimes we are better than you, and then it gets to political, that there are some Satmar or other Haredi groups, Hasidim, who are anti-Zionistic, and they march together with Iran basically to destroy Israel. And they go to Iran and they hug all the elite of Iran mullahs, and so I cannot stand them, and they come with swastikas too in a way. But then again, it's not the majority. At least this group is not, and but I think it's a human nature of competition that some groups don't want believe that they have the light and the others don't have the light, and it goes further that between religious and non-religious, and becomes between right wing and left wing. When in Israel, the Hague decided to bring to court Israeli officers who were fighting fighting back in a way in Gaza against hundreds of missiles that were shot at Israel. Then they want those people in the Hague want to bring them to court. So there are some Israelis who help them to bring the Israelis to court, and so you have always those things. And I don't think we'll able. This is something that I lectured on the evening of Tisha B'Av, the last Tisha B'Av in Jerusalem on Balfour Street. I was lecturing on the street with a microphone to many supporters, and I spoke about the destruction of our two temples 2,000 years ago, and all the way until now about Jews who became traitors, those Mityavnim, or those who became joined the Greek people or the Roman people and turned against the Jews. And so there are still today people, in my opinion. We created a state, a country here, and they try to destroy it. They got the state on silver tray, and they try to destroy it just for, in my opinion, stupid thoughts. And they think that our enemies who want to destroy us would love them, and they love them because they side with our enemies. So again, there are Jews who are against Jews, but that's mainly because between right and left, and who so far are lost because they are losing all the time. There was an organization 1930s, Brit Shalom, here in Jerusalem with Martin Buber and Yehuda Magnes, the president of the Hebrew University, and many others, who decided to be able to see if there's no possibility to make peace with the Arabs. When they talked to King of Jordan, King Abdallah, he was shot by his own people on the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they never were able to see that the Arabs are really honestly want to make peace with us, and so it goes until now. So we have many of those people with us in America and Israel, who, in my opinion, are on the wrong side of the
But
map.
just theologically, you think that's a false doctrine, that anti-Semitism is what God uses to keep Jews religious, going back to the Alter Rebbe and versus the Remnitzer Rebbe, Napoleon, and the Tsar, which is better. And you just theologically, without, like names, I saying even mainstream people here in, Spartam and, say like, well, God forbid, rising anti-Semitism is good because it's going to force secular Jews to return to religion, and just say doctrinally that is that actually our doctrine, or are you saying it's a false doctrine of Judaism to say that God uses anti-Semitism to keep Jews performing the mitzvahs, and if Jews stop doing the mitzvahs, anti-Semitism is God's method of trying to get us to return to doing the mitzvahs? And I say not just like Notori Karta or Haredim, but I think that's pretty mainstream, even in a typical yeshiva in America or Chabad, and even modern Orthodox, that's just an understanding of how God created the world, the role of Torah, the role of Jews, and the role of anti-Semitism. And I'm not sure if you think that's a false doctrine,
Well, semi-false. I mean, generally speaking, it's not a doctrine, although many Jews, many rabbis see it in their doctrine, possibly. I see it, the only approach is to approach with love to whoever we can approach, and with love to get them, to convince them where the light is, so to say, and whether Jews or non-Jews, to show love to everybody. ואהבת לרעך כמוך, you love the other like yourself, your neighbor like yourself, and so that I go in the positive side, the loving care for people, and not as a punishment or as something that there will be. I don't see a way that people will start to keep mitzvahs only because they were whatever that doctrine. I go for the positive side.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think certainly the Lubavitch Rebbe and mainstream Zionism, but I think it's a pretty popular doctrine and approach to anti-Semitism, where it's kind of like it's ordained by God's will, and it's a tool that God uses to keep us in line, maybe theologically, but on the practical approach, because I talk with anti-Semites, God forbid, all the time. In America, if you just take an ADL survey, 1 out of 10 people is basically a pretty severe anti-Semite that probably doesn't want Jews in America. That, just statistically, 1 out of 10 Americans, if you poll them and ask them questions in a certain way, would probably agree that they don't want Jews in America. And it could be regionally, among elites, among wealthy people, among universities, in urban areas. That might be less to an approach to dealing with certain issues where there's a lot of various reasons why people have problems with Jews, to a person who I had one problem with one Jew, and then they thought because they had one problem with one Jew that all the Jews are going to be on the side of the Jew they had problems with. And it's just some sort of escalation of group conflicts, that one Jew did something wrong and it caused a person to hate all Jews, to combating anti-Semitism, where we do have conflict. We have people that we have run-ins with that are so-called anti-Semites, and then as a group, we try to, so to say, quash them. We try to stop them, and if that causes some sort of side, group conflict in the way we deal with things, and the main issues, like here in America, like you hear people on the right wing or the the left wing different, but the right wing say, I don't mind Jews. They mind immigration, they mind multiculturalism, or say they mind pornography, they mind certain things that they blame on the left. So even if you're in a anti-Semite, they're going to tell you that how come you guys, all they want to do is stop pornography, and they think it's the Jews' fault, which it may be accurate that there are Jews that are pushing that, but does that justify someone to actively crusade against Jews? And the main issue in America is really immigration, that statistically Jews are big promoters of immigration. I think every single major Jewish organization in America supports immigration. And so you find a lot of people that are even philo-Semitic, but there's like, we got to stop immigration, and Jews are promoting immigration. So as long as the Jews are on the side of immigration, they're going to be against Jews in totality. And that's a big issue in Europe and America. And, even how you define these things, like anti-Semitic, like I said, if someone said like they got beat up by a Jew and they did nothing wrong, and now they hate all Jews because they think the Jews are going to take the side of the person who wronged them, or if they just, for whatever reason, they think society should move in a different direction in like a group conflict, like Jews are pushing immigration and they think immigration is bad, and therefore instead of fighting immigration, they determine it's more logical to fight the Jews.
Well, that's what happened in Pittsburgh by these Nazi white supremacists, or whatever you would call him, that he heard that...
Well, if you just call him an anti-immigration activist. I mean, this guy may have been a white, but if you just said an anti-immigration activist.
Yeah, because the people on that Shabbat, some of the Jews in the synagogue discussed the issue how to help refugees come to America, and that was his reason. Those who hate us don't need reasons to kill us. They can find any reason. But yeah, the Jews in America divide into two, so to say, Democrats and Republicans. And those who are Democrats go for so-called human rights, but sometimes with blindly. When the border is open to Mexico, to the south, how many Iranian agents came with those people? We don't know. How many other agents came into, or people who want to hurt America? And I would like to help people who, if they suffer in their countries, to give them help to enter this place for America, but it should be somewhat controlled and organized. I don't like to see nowadays the hundreds of children lying on the floor now in cages over there. And the Democrats used to complain that Trump created cages. They do the same. And we also built a wall in Israel, and it saved many, many lives. I think that countries in Europe, they also keep their borders now again against influx. They already lost the game in France and in Germany. It's too late. They lost the game. I spoke 40 years ago to the French that whenever there was a hooligan, so to say, who burned Jewish shops and burned cars on the streets and demonstrated widely, the French would come out and say, some young people or young French demonstrated, demolished whatever, but they were Muslims, but the French were afraid to talk to, to bring it up. But then I always say the more you keep quiet about it, the more you keep your eyes closed from it, you'll suffer more. And now French and Germany are in such a position that, they have so many over there who, at the call of the imams, will go out and do terrible things. In Germany a few years ago, in Cologne, on Christmas evening, there were 200 Muslim, I'll call them militants, so nobody will blame me for, who really attacked German women. And they believe that German women are a creation of Allah. Allah created the whole world. Allah created all the houses. Allah created all the cars. And they should have it. That's how they grew up to believe that everything belongs to them because their God created it. So they can do, and they learn in the Arab countries that blonde girls or blonde women are very free and let them do whatever they want. And when they come, many of them learn in the Arab countries, when they immigrated to France or Germany, that they'll get a big black Mercedes because they deserve it. And so they behave like that. And the Germans suffer this immigration. And thank God in America, I didn't get to this position, but we see what happens in Europe. They close the borders. It's not anymore United Europe that they wanted to have.
I was saying facts on the ground is that basically all Republican, Orthodox, right-wing Jews also are largely pro-immigration. When President Trump signed the Anti-Immigration Act, all of the Orthodox right-wing groups that supported Trump, stood up and said, we disagree with you on the immigration issue. And polling is the majority of Americans, just like World War II, even God forbid when the Jews were seeking refuge in America, that statistically the majority of Americans are against immigration. But factually, Jews are very pro-immigration. There could be multiple, and even right-wing Jews are generally pro-immigration. So, what you just said right now is basically anti-Semitic, because if you're in America, the Jewish organizations, even the right-wing ones, don't say what you say. They support the immigration, including of Muslims, to America. And from my there's, like you said, like people can hate Jews for any reason. But it seems from, a few years of debating and talking to people, it's the immigration issue that is the biggest divergence, because the majority of Americans don't want more immigrants here. And the vast majority of Jews, like 90% of American Jews, are pro-immigration. And it's just a huge, um, dividing point. And you even have Israelis that largely agree that immigration, too much immigration, is a bad thing. I don't know if you've put too much effort or thought into the immigration issue, or you even looked at the statistics that even right-wing Jews like that run for Republicans are generally pro-immigrant. And then if you trust the polling, that it's just the fact that the majority of American non-Jews don't want more immigrants here.
Well, in America, the Orthodox Jews that I know from Yeshiva University or from Upper West Side or from Lower Marian Synagogue in Philadelphia, they want to keep America, strong America, and they are not against immigration, but they are for controlled immigration, that you know who enters and what happens to him, and then you give him the rights, but not to let everybody, and to smuggle women, to smuggle prostitutes, to smuggle drugs, to smuggle weapons. And many criminals take those, open border situation, and they bring drugs, and they trade women, and all of those terrible things. America,
and that's the right-wing Jewish opinion, that there's good immigrants and bad immigrants. But it would appear that the American non-Jew basically doesn't like immigrants, period. And even like you said, Jews do so well, like the Asians, that the problem, like alt-right, someone like Richard Spencer say the problem isn't Mexicans and poor criminals. The problem is, God forbid, Jews, Indians, Chinese people, because we're smarter than them, because we rise to the elites. So that even the YU people, like they say, okay, maybe we don't want Muslim terrorists or Mexicans, but we want skilled Indians and skilled Chinese. That the buzzword would be demographic replacement, and that is almost like you're an anti-Semite just if you mention the concept of replacement. And then also, like, the people, what about people that are the targets of Jewish organizations? Because most of the people who reach out to me to speak to me, they think that they're getting done in by Jews. Like they think that they're defending them. I'm not defending anti-Semites, but just from their own perspective, they think they're getting done in by Jews. And then when they say, like, look, like, I'm on this list, here are these Jews trying to ruin my life. And, from their perspective, like, I'm not even anti-Semite, I'm just opposed to immigration. And here these Jews are trying to ruin my life because I'm just saying from my experience, I'm not sure if you've had that much personal dealings with people. And I could, if you were online willing to argue with anti-Semites, they would probably argue with you about immigration all day, all night for years.
But listen, David, you'll agree with me that almost every country in the world, they don't want immigration unless it's controlled. The Chinese don't want immigrations from Myanmar, from Burma. The Japanese don't want immigrants. Almost every country, Europe, they don't want immigrants. Also because many of the people are afraid that immigrants will take their jobs, especially menial jobs. And there's hardly any, Iraq didn't want to have immigrants. They didn't want Palestinians to come to Iraq. And if the Palestinians came to Iraq back then, they couldn't have a car for themselves. They couldn't have an apartment. They couldn't have a phone for themselves, and that's Arab to Arab. And still today, among the Arab countries, they don't want Jordan. They don't want. They took. They were nice to many Syrians who had to escape the massacres. 500,000 Syrians were killed. So Jordan took maybe 2 million, I don't know how many, and that's nice, but they cannot take more. They are collapsing. And so hardly any country that I know want to have immigrants unless it's controlled immigrants, or unless there are immigrants who contribute to the country in certain fields. In America, there is a controlled immigration, and the green card is one way. But but otherwise they want to have people who graduated in universities to come to America. Every country want good people to come. Of course, we in Israel, we want to have immigrants to come, and we fight for it. And but then again, in America, as I said, open border brings the drugs and prostitution and killings and mafia and Mexican cartel and everything into Texas and Arizona and all those states and all over the country.
Can I inject something? Can I inject something here?
Yeah, please. I had one last question about the role of half Jews, but I'll David, as long as you continue, please, Professor. Okay,
David, the issue of immigration is not really, in my opinion, is not completely entirely Jewish American problem. It is a liberal, democratic party, leftist agenda problem. Right. All of them. It's not really religious specifically. So therefore, it's really the leftist politics that really are pro-immigration. And understandably, we understand why, because they themselves are second generation immigrants, especially among the Arab Americans.
They will vote for their politicians.
Exactly.
I think the major vote for their politicians.
I think the major issue
are like a conspiracy by saying polling wise, the biggest divergence between Jews and non-Jews in America is immigration, and organizationally that it's just a huge overwhelming difference between the way Jews look at America and the majority looks at America.
Okay, it's my turn.
Can I say something, Raul?
Yeah.
Just on this point. Yeah. Okay, first of all, I've had to connect, but at least I've connected. I was trying so hard. And then I connected eventually. So really, kol hakavod, really well done, Emanuel. What an amazing presentation. Incredible beyond belief. But with regard to the immigration, do you know that Israel, by bringing in the Ethiopian Jews, that's quite a unique part of world history, because here you have a country that brought in people that were living in a third world, impoverished, and we brought them to Israel. It's very rare that you ever have any country that will not only go out of their way, but to bring in people from a third world country that you need to support. It's not the other way around. And that shows the most amazing character of the Jewish people and the state of Israel. And it's, I think, unique in world history, and it really is. It's we are Ola Kol HaGoyim, we're a light to the nations, and we were prepared and more than willing to bring in Jews from so far away from villages without running water, without electricity, to bring them to Israel and to absorb them. And there have been problems, but we did everything in our effort, and it was on a whole incredibly successful. And I think it's an amazing thing in world history, because it's never really been done before.
Wait, I got to add something here. Can I?
I lost hearing you.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Can you hear yourself?
Okay, now it's my turn. Usually, I wouldn't make any comments. I just like to make introductions. But Emanuel, are you there? The image froze. Oh, you are there. Okay, number one. Now you can all hear me, right? Because I can't hear myself.
We hear a baby crying in the background too.
That's
is that
okay.
you?
That's my grandchildren. I want to add a few facts here. Israel took in what? How many Ethiopians? 30,000? 40,000?
No, it's 120, more than 120.
Let me give you,
maybe.
Good. Now, without denying running before our chariot and throwing flowers, let me give you two statistics by comparison. There's a fight now in the Ukraine between Ukrainians and the eastern provinces, which are mostly Russian. My son-in-law is from Poland. The Poles took in 1 million Ukrainian refugees. So without saying that, I'm all in favor of saying good things about Israel. But it's small potatoes compared to, and even the Ukrainians and the Poles don't like each other. That's number one. Number two, Jordan took in 1 million Iraqi refugees. So again, I'm all in favor of saying good things about Israel, but to present taking in a few thousand Ethiopians as some remarkable achievement with no parallel in the rest of the world is complete nonsense.
No,
That's
no, Lowell, I have to stop you. It's not so true, because the Jordanians took them in as temporary refugees that they would be returned. They didn't resettle them. They haven't made them Jordanian citizens.
Okay.
Israel brought in Ethiopians to make them Israeli citizens and to give them a better life. And even the Ukrainians, maybe there's a different agenda, that they'd be populate areas that were unpopulated. Who knows?
That may be true, but the 1 million Iraqi refugees in Jordan are still there, and the 1 million Ukrainian refugees in Poland are still there. But that's not even the main point. Common sense. No country in the world has unrestricted immigration. You can't walk across the border into any country in the world, and to suggest that is off the wall. Number two, what's coming in across the border from Mexico is not just some, first of all, President Trump did not create the cages. They were created by Biden and Obama. Let's have a reality check here. Number two, the Democratic Party that I knew growing up, of Henry Jackson, Harry Truman, Daniel Inouye, doesn't exist anymore. It's a shell, it's a hull that's been infiltrated by about 4 major communist and socialist organizations. There are people who make money on the drug and sex slavery and human trafficking. And that money goes into institutions affiliated with the current Democratic Party, which is a party in the same way that the Nazi Party was a party of a movement. Number three, people in the Democratic Party use MS-13 as hitmen to kill people. And George Soros and others funds Antifa and Black Lives Matter to kill Americans. These are like the SA and SS units, all right? So to say America, unlike any other country in the world, you can just walk across the border, that's craziness. And anyone who says it is crazy. There's no such thing. Every country has a normal country procedure. You go to Ellis Island, you get checked, you have diseases, if you have someone who can support you, and if you can't, you go back. So even the reason that those who want that is not just because they want votes so they can steal the election. Remember what I'm going to tell you. You're going to see President Trump won the election, real numbers 100 million votes. They're going after them state by state to tighten up the voter registration. They got away with it. Even Trump let them get away with it. So now people can see what they're doing, all right? But let's even leave that. Now, regarding Jew hatred, the issue was raised a few minutes back about Pittsburgh. And Gab, which was founded by Andrew Torba, was shut down temporarily because the person who committed the murder announced on Gab he was going to do it before he did it. He could have announced on anything. Now, I'm glad I'm saying this in a public forum. The only platform, the first platform to shut down my account were the apostles of free speech at Gab. I'm saying this, got all the witnesses out there. When I wrote to them and said, why'd you do that? They said, you're spamming people. So I wrote back to the help and said, what do you mean I'm spamming people? You have a wolf pack of Jew haters with the most disgusting images right out of Julius Streicher. Where do you think they got them from? And I'm fighting back, but I'm not supposed to fight back. They never answered, so I opened an account under another name. Now, the governor of Texas recently said he doesn't like Gab because he thinks it's anti-Semitic. And Andrew Torba said, that's not fair. We're in favor of free speech. Okay. When I was on Gab, I saw a conversation between Andrew Torba and a guy called Neon Revolt discussing their attitude towards Jews on his own channel. And Torba said, I'm into replacement theology. And Neon said, that's nothing. I'm into supersessionism. You want to know what those words mean? I'll tell you what they mean. It means they accept the classical, bluntly. You're looking at 1900 years of the mass murder, mass torture, and mass vilifications of, for them, the Christ-killing kikes and deicide murdering yids of classical Christian theology, set in stone in 4 centuries by the church fathers, and then perpetrated in the lands of the Roman Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, and state Protestant churches, culminating in the Nazi German Jewish mass murder of Jews in the heart of Christian Europe. Now, there are 3 ways that Jew haters deal with what happened. The first thing they say is, well, for all those people who did that, they weren't Christians, real Christians. Go read the church fathers. I was accepted into a MA doctoral program at Harvard Divinity School in church history and theology. I didn't go, I came to Israel. Number 2, they say, well, the Nazis were anti-Christian. Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites. The Nazis were only they were anti-Christian, but they were not anti-Christian anti-Semitism. They based all their legislation on canon law. And their big heroes were John Chrysostom and Martin Luther. And a footnote, Martin Luther, the great hero of faith versus works. When the peasants in Germany, people read what Luther said. Well, that's great, we want freedom too, and they revolted against the lords. Luther knew where his bread was buttered, and he wasn't prepared to die on any cross for the peasants. He sided with the lords, which slaughtered the peasants. And after that, he was very unpopular with the peasants. The third point they make is they say Sabatians and Frankists, who hated Orthodox religious Jews, seeped into the population and worked. If you listen to under their extreme views, the Brown House was a yeshiva and the Nazis were all rabbis. Now, there is some basis to a relation between Jewish Gnostic millennial occult groups like the Sabatians and the Frankists, which especially didn't like religious Jews, and the Gentile Gnostic millennial groups. They were quite happy to work together to gauge in, you have to understand what the death camps were. For them, this was a continuation of ancient rites of human sacrifice, and they were understood as such. These were mass human sacrifices to their deities. And they said so themselves. You just have to read the pre-Nazi philosophers called the Ariosophists. Yeah, the Theosophists went in 2 directions. One was Rudolf Steiner with the Anthroposophists, and the other were the Ariosophists. If you read what these people wrote, Lance von Liebenfels, they gave themselves the von this, they weren't von anything. They say, slaughter the children of the Strattlingen. Right, the last point. Jews for the Nazis were not Untermenschen. They had a special name for us called the Gegenrasse. There's only one group on earth they regarded as powerful as them, like the Jedi and the Sith of Star Wars. That was us. Only one group was targeted. Yes, the final solution was we'll murder all the Jews and we'll murder most of the Slavs. The Hunger Plan. Herbert Becker of the SS. All right, so they have a problem. They don't want to be reminded of what they did to us. And what Mr. Christensen, who I worked with, who left the Nobel Peace, they gave the Peace Prize to Arafat and he left. And that was 25 years ago. He left the Nobel Prize Committee because they gave the Peace Prize to Yasser Arafat. That wasn't his real name. And he said to me, verbatim, he said, you want to know why we hate you? He spent his whole life being pro-Israel. Because despite everything we did to you, you're still prospering. This what gets back to what Emanuel said, jealousy and hatred and envy. Well, that's in any society. People who are successful are often resented by those who are not so smart or lazy. Now, a final point, because I wrote, Alex Jones had Andrew Torba on Alex's show after the massacre. And I listened to it and I couldn't believe what I was listening to. It took him 15 minutes to get out of his mouth it was a synagogue. And mostly he was feeling sorry for himself. So I wrote to him on Gab, I hadn't been thrown off yet, and I said, you know what? You said you're praying for the victims? You're a good Christian, right? What does it say in the book of James? Faith without works is dead. Did you send them a box of chocolate or flowers or a condolence card? Anything? Don't talk to me about prayer. And after 19 centuries of what I just told you, I don't want to hear one peep from any of you about faith versus works or the spirit of the law or the letter of the law, and I make it worse. Then I'll finish. The Catholic Church. Do you know, I had a big fight with someone from the Bishops' Conference when I was involved in interfaith dialogue. He didn't even know it. Dr. Eugene Fisher from the National Council of Catholic Bishops and the Office for Relations with the Jews. I said to him, he thought it was anti-Catholic propaganda. I said, do you know how Hitler passed the Enabling Act? He needed 2/3 majority, didn't have it. How did he get the 2/3 majority? Because on orders of the Vatican, the Catholic Center Party gave him the swing vote to destroy German democracy. He was shocked. He was angry at me. Again, blame the messenger. I said, that's just for hors d'oeuvres. What was the first foreign power to recognize the new Nazi government? The Vatican. Then there was the Concordat. And who got the Nazi criminals and the gold from our grandparents' teeth out? Through the Vatican Bank. The Vatican. And they got the Nazi criminals out like Bishop Alois Hudel from Tyrol. And in addition to that, how many Nazi war criminals born Catholic were ever excommunicated, including Adolf Hitler? Not one. Now I know they throw out the excommunication, the lightning rod. If in the 1930s, if a Catholic married a Protestant, you got excommunicated. I know of a case like that. Extended family. Commit mass murder? No. And I remember at an interfaith conference in Heppenheim at Martin Buber's house. Emanuel mentioned he's friends with Martin Buber. Actually, I live right next to where he lived here. So I said to the Catholic representative, why don't you excommunicate Adolf Hitler? And this miserable, wicked little smile, again, woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites. He said, well, he wasn't a practicing Catholic. You hypocritical, phony, sanctimonious frauds. You're talking about the cross. The church is a cross of crucified on the cross of their own criminality, and they can't handle it. And again, when they do try to handle it, then they go to what I call forgiveness porn. In Stockholm Syndrome, imagine the murderer, the rapist, or the thief turning around saying to the victim, now you got to forgive me. You're not to vengeance, are you? This is obscene. That is the wrong question. Don't come to victims. Well, constantly going to victims and what the Armenians should forgive the Turks? Wrong question. The question is, okay, what can I do to make it better? My grandparents, I'm a Turk. It happened. What can I do? Because most people are stupid, selfish, mean, and cruel, and think about themselves. It goes back to Adam and Eve. Pass the buck, CYA, including right here when we have our own problems. So what was I going to say? That really got me about Andrew Torb and Gab. He never answered. I said, do you have an annual commemoration? People say you're anti-Semitic. No, we're not. What do? You don't do anything because you couldn't care less. And one other point, Andrew Torba put out a pompous statement saying, only in a Christian country are Christian rights respected. So I wrote him, of course he didn't answer. And I said, Christians are massacred all over the world. I know one country where in 70 years, no Christians have ever been massacred in their churches, the Zionist state of Israel. And Christians don't like when I point out to them that when the Crusaders arrived in Jerusalem to liberate it from the Muslims, they took all the Jewish men, women, and children, put them in the synagogue and burned them alive while they sang the Te Deum. Now, if that doesn't sound screwed up to you, to anyone who says Houston, we have a problem. You have a big problem. You get back to Isaiah. Woe to those who call good evil and evil good, right? So, I'll change it to everyone's view, gallery view. All right, fine, we could do that. So to conclude, actually, I said everything I wanted to say. That got me about Gad, because the mean-spirited, miserable, pompous, vicious, sanctimonious, where the perpetrators say, no, we're the victims. Then I ask him another question. In the 70 years of the state of Israel, I'm not a big fan of the state of Israel. We've discussed that privately. How many Christians had their children stolen from them for conversion? None. How many were burned alive in their churches? None. No massacres, not permitted here. How many people were forced to either convert to Judaism or leave the country, get killed? None. They don't like to be reminded about it. They have a problem. And I make one more point. It's a subtle point. Why? In Christian theology, with St. Augustine, you're a witness people, and with Thomas Aquinas, not saints to me, you may exist as a slave people. What do I want to say about that? If you have the view that the existence of a Jew is a crime, your existence, if your existence is a criminal act, you have no right to self-defense. Therefore, anything you do is always an act of aggression. And you see this over and over again in the foreign press. I wasted my money being a member of the Foreign Press Association from 1992 to 2011. Then my wife says, these Jew and Israel haters, and they're stupid too. Why do you waste money being a member? So I stop. Always, and anything an Arab does to a Jew, it's because the Jew did something first. It can never be an act of aggression. It's very deep in the Christian culture. It's about 1900 centuries. The music, the art, the literature, the scale. There's no parallel for that of anything in human history. And I got a new blog I'm working on called From Gospel to Gas Chamber. And I'm going to document everything I said from Christian scholars. Christians don't like to hear it. They're going to hear it. They're going to get the golden calf ground up in the powder, and they're going to drink it. They're not going to like it. The kind of stuff I say, no one from the Israeli government would dare to say, or any Jewish organization, because they'd be afraid it would cause anti-Semitism. But Christians need to hear it. You want to be a Christian? Fine. But you got to know what your history was. And whenever they start about Jews in Israel, I let them have it about that. Massacres of Christians in Nigeria, massacres of Christians in their church in the United States. No massacres here, it's not permitted. I think I've said enough, especially about Gab. And again, there's just this wall of cold anger because they're used to looking at themselves as the victims of us. They don't want to hear that. It just makes them more rageous and more jealous. It's just like in Snow White, when the queen says to the mirror, who's the most beautiful? Snow White, Your Majesty. Here's the mirror. I'm going to hold it up. And I'm just getting warmed up. I've said enough.
Oh, I just want to mention, have you read Malcolm Hay, The Foot of Pride?
Okay, since you asked.
Because he
wrote
wrote the most iconic
I got
book.
these books, James Parks, Malcolm
Yeah,
Hay,
James Parks,
Father
Malcolm
Flannery,
Hay in particular.
Professor Littell. I was accepted to a doctoral program in Holocaust Studies with Reverend Dr. Franklin Littell to begin, thank you, in the fall of 1980 at Temple University, as I had taken his class in the spring of 1980 on the Christian roots of Nazi anti-Semitism at Hebrew U. And he was very much looking for me to join him. And then I decided I can't do it because I have no emotional filters and I couldn't look at that material. But I looked at it enough, and what I found was I was going to do the doctorate on what are the churches, the history of Christian Jew hatred, and what the churches did and didn't do before, during, and after the war. The real story is so bad, no Jewish organization will touch it. I'll give you one example, and then that will be enough. The Einsatzgruppen. Everyone here knows what that is? The murder squads? The leaders of the Einsatz, professors, lawyers. One was a Protestant theologian. Die Evangelische Kirche Deutschland. His name was Bieberstein. And he wasn't excommunicated or stripped of his clerical ordination, even as the head of the Einsatzgruppen. And then in 1946 in Darmstadt, when the Evangelische Kirche Deutschland had their annual meeting, they said, 1 year later, when it was too fresh for people to pretend it didn't happen. Well, we now call upon the Jews to cease your ongoing crucifixion of Christ. So I have a comment when I talk to Christians, and they don't like it. I said, some of you think if you're not into amillennialism, your candidate's coming back. What are you going to say when he says to you, while I was gone, what did you do to my brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers and sons and daughters and grandpas and grandmas? Well, we gassed them, we burned them, we drowned them, we burned them alive in their synagogue to show how we loved you. They're in big trouble. Unless you have a Manichaean, religious, like what was he, Marcion, where up is down and down is up. You're dealing with satanic, you're dealing with the real face of evil here. I don't have anything I want to add any further.
So let's finish it. And anybody who would like to call Lowell and get in touch, otherwise they could get in touch with me for any questions or any answers or any information. We would love to keep in touch.
Did you have time to answer about the role of partial Jews or patrilineal Jews in anti-Semitism? I know you mentioned that, God forbid, there's a lot of Jews that are involved in these neo-Nazi marches or stuff that don't even know that they're Jewish, that repent. But it would seem the vast majority of your Jews involved in it are actually patrilineal, and it comes to a difficult question of how you define a Jew. And does a patrilineal Jew who's like an eighth Jew from their father, are they more likely to be anti-Semitic? And how do you have any strategies or experience in so to say, dealing with the partial Jews and or do you even think that that's more likely to make a person be anti-Semitic, a bit of Jewish blood, or is your experience that's not the case, that most anti-Semites don't have Jewish blood, or a lot of them do actually have a little bit of Jewish blood?
So what's exactly the question?
Well, and there's a funny story in Bryant's book on Hitler's Jewish soldiers, where Moses Mendelssohn has a great grandson that served as an officer in the Nazi army that had blonde hair and blue eyes and was like 6'2" and was like 1/8 Jewish. And he went to a Nazi event with another man who was 100% German. I forget the name from the story. And they announced like the short, bald, fat guy as Mendelssohn, and Mendelssohn, who was like 6'2" and blonde hair and blue eyes, as the German aristocrat. But I mean, there's just a factual history that even Moses Mendelssohn had people that bore his name that were officers in the Nazi army. But that's just one story. But I find people that I speak to, a lot of the very harsh critics of Judaism will openly admit that they're partial Jewish, that they had a Jewish grandfather, or especially patrilineal, where according to Jewish law they may not. I don't know if you have any comment on that or experience.
Well, I know that there were many Jews already in the classroom before the war who were pointed at as the Aryan, and they used to be the Jews in the class. I know many people personally who were that class, that this lady or this man, the teacher pointed at them to show the other students in the class, this is the real Aryan, and they were Jewish. I know of Jews who, as the best protection not to get caught by the Nazis, joined the Hitlerjugend, the Hitler Youth, or even joined the SS. Of course, they were behaving differently than the other SS, and many of them helped Jews during the war. But this was for them the coverage. They just had to make sure they don't go to take a shower when the others took a shower, not to see that they're circumcised. When somebody was, if somebody was Jew some generations ago, and then a non-Jew, it could be a Nazi, neo-Nazi, could be a bad person, depends on the education that he got. But there were stories of Jews who said, well, this German was very nice to me, this German soldier or officer or whatever. In many cases, there were Jews hiding, or there were children or grandchildren Jews. In 1870, in Berlin, 70,000 Jews converted to Christianity to be able to get jobs in a university or as doctors or lawyers. And you can imagine how many descendants of them were in the war as Nazis, knowingly or not. But I would assume that those who knew that they are from Jewish roots behave differently than the others, but then everybody can become a terrible person.
Well, it's saying that in America, there's millions of Jews that are, even in Israel, it's a big issue because a lot of them are actually eligible for the right of return according to Israeli law, even if they're not religiously Jewish. They could have a Jewish grandfather and be eligible for the right of return. But in America, there's millions and millions of people like that, and a lot of times their parents don't tell them that they're Jewish. They don't even know that they're Jewish, and
Sure.
they might have a distaste of Jews, not knowing that they're partially Jewish. And what is the role of Jewish law? If you're looking, like Christopher Jan Berkness is probably the best example today, who is probably the biggest critic of Jews in the whole world, and he says his grandfather was a Jew who abandoned him, and so I've heard Orthodox Jews actually from, it's even mentioned in the Kabbalah and Swarm going back 1,000 years that that a lot of these famous anti-Semites are really descended from Jews, and that could be a part of folklore. My experience is I can't draw a trend from people I speak to, but you don't have any heuristic or insight on if there's some special problem that the result of intermarriage and millions of partial blooded Jews that may or may not even know that they're Jewish or know anything about Judaism. And that's why I support your work, because it's people like you who put out education that people can know what it means to be Jewish. But maybe you haven't had that much insight where people will tell you that they have a great that they're part Jewish. But to me, it happens all the time.
Emanuel, can I say something? David, if you look at medieval or the time of the Inquisition or the Black Death in Europe, a lot of Jews that converted to Christianity became the worst anti-Semites, and not only that, but not only that, they were even they had like disputations, and some were forced to convert. And those that did convert, with Rambam, Pablo Cristiani, he was Jewish, and he became like one of the worst haters of Judaism. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense. So it happened before; it's nothing new. And Dafka, the worst of the worst were actually Jews that had converted. They were like incredibly cruel and incredibly they had no compassion to their Jewish to the from when they converted, they wanted to show that they were more Christian than the Christians. So I don't know, Emanuel, what do you think about in the Shoah? Do you think there were
Well, I'm also differentiating between full Jews and partial Jews, because I know what you're saying.
Yeah, sure, there were.
But is there a difference between Jews who convert that are full Jew and a quarter Jew that
So
you
there were
just had a Jewish grandfather.
so there were rabbis that were involved in disputations that were forcibly converted, and then they really turned on and they were fully Jewish, and they turned on their brethren. So I don't think I don't know if there's such a distinction between partial or full, because there were, if in those days most of them were full Jews, and some of them were like horrendous. They would like became the worst enemies of the Jews, were Jews that had converted. They were the worst of the worst. So Emmanuel, I don't know what you want to add to this, but that's
Well,
just
there's
my
no
take
difference. It depends on the personality, I guess, and if he's more Jewish or less Jewish didn't make sense. It didn't make a difference, because I would say that there are many Jews today who hate other Jews. One could call them anti-Semitic, and they destroy everything the Jews are building or creating, and they come against them and side with their enemies, wherever they are. And so they don't have to be even descendant of Jews. They can be Jews who were born Jews and are against our people here in Israel or in America or wherever. And but thank God we survived. The Ramban was able to win this converted Jew and win against the bishop, and then he was able to come to Israel. So there was a good end to this disputation that became one of the early Zionists. Yeah.
So would you deal with them differently if someone contacted you, and had their, problems with the Jews, God forbid, and they told you they were a quarter Jew or an eighth Jew? Would you deal with them just like if they were 100% non-Jewish, or it would make a difference to you in how you dealt with them that they had, some Jewish blood in them?
No, in person to person, I show love to everybody. Yeah. And if they're friendly, I'm friendly. As far as religious aspects, if they want to become part of us in the Jewish faith, it all depends on the rabbis if they need a giur. But then again, I met Germans in Germany. They came to me, to my synagogues, and I found out some of them that were halachic Jews. They just had a feeling for it, but they weren't sure. And when I found out that their mother and grandmother were Jewish, I told them that they don't even have to convert, and they're still in Germany. And if they're good people or bad people, it depends on them personally. And if they're more against Jews or none, usually they were very friendly to the Jews.
So David,
David, can I just mention, in South Africa, the most vehemently anti-Israel critic is a Jew who is a communist, he has such a tremendous hatred for Israel and he's Jewish himself. And it's irrelevant if he's part Jewish, I think he's fully Jewish, but I don't know. But it makes no difference. It makes absolutely no difference. So if somebody's like, I don't think, it's hard to generalize, but it's very sad. But what happened in South Africa is that the community, it's a very Zionistic community, so they've stood very strongly together. But he's caused tremendous problems for the Jewish community, and he's Jewish himself. So it's nothing new. Like Shlomo Melech said, "Ein chadash takat hashemesh." There's nothing new under the sun. We had it 1,000 years ago. We had it 2,000 years ago. We've got it now. We had it in Nazi, during the Shoah, and we've got it now as well.
Yeah.
Well, I know Lowell had, advertised. I'm not sure if he was, how serious he was that Emanuel, that you were thinking of doing another documentary on Lowell and Root and Branch. Is that possible?
Sure, it's possible. The whole mishpoche.
Wait, since I'm right here, I never made. I have no objection to it, but I never made such an advertisement that I'm aware of.
Well, I think in a private message to me, maybe that you mentioned that. I don't know if you didn't want me to say it, or maybe it was hopeful, or is actual discussions you had.
Well, I'd have to see the message, because I don't remember ever sending such a message.
So I'm glad I mentioned it, because if you're still making documentaries,
I don't think
who do you have better than Lowell and Les?
No, I don't think I ever mentioned that. I have no objection to it. I can't imagine why he would be interested in doing that. But
Well, has he seen Les's YouTube channel? I mean, Emanuel, are you familiar with the interviews of Holocaust survivors that Les has been doing?
Oh yeah,
only
I just
thing-
wrote
Emmanuel's a
him,
very close friend. Emmanuel's an exceptionally close friend.
I just wrote him today, Kol hakavod for all your interviews.
No,
That you do.
Emmanuel, you're a very close friend, a very dear and close friend. And Emmanuel, you are an example we can all emulate. You really are. You're amazing. And the article that was in the Jerusalem Report by Steve Lindy was absolutely superb. I would encourage everybody to get a copy of that Jerusalem Report. It is absolutely phenomenal, and it's
Right.
so well deserving, because you really are extraordinary, Emmanuel. You really are.
Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate your work. I mean, I've been watching Les's YouTube for years, and I wasn't familiar with your work. I'm glad I am, but you know, I'm someone largely who you know, came on through. I mean, I knew rabbis, but you know, people like Les and you who put out content for you know, people to self-educate themselves. And you know, it's nice to go to a rabbi, a synagogue, to a community, but in this day's internet, it's probably mostly self-education that you have to make content and put it out there, and you can't even necessarily control who's going to see it. Like you said, I mean, you know, how many millions or tens of millions of people have seen works that you've done, and how many people you have no idea who they are that have seen this work.
Yep.
David, can I just say something? You should go also to Lowell. Lowell's YouTube is phenomenal. Lowell has had interviews with incredible people. I just saw today one with Steve Lindy that he did so many years ago. It is
Wait a second.
mind-boggling
Okay.
how good.
Since
Is that different than a documentary? I mean, Lowell and
Wait,
Les both have
since-
hundreds and hundreds of interviews
minute.
with
Since-
people, as opposed to like a documentary. I mean, I guess that's a different
No,
genre.
but
Since I'm present here, I can be the fact checker. All right, I have 3 channels. One is my own personal channel. The other is the Root and Branch Association channel. And the third is a little channel I have with Laura Ledbetter in New York, with some interviews we did in 2013, 2014. Did we do them too? When I was there visiting my father at the Hebrew home. Because I was mad at Facebook and YouTube for their escalating and outrageous censorship of anything they don't like. 3 years ago when they started this, if someone would have said they did that, they would have been told by our corporate fascist mouthpieces, the mainstream media, that's a conspiracy theory. Well, it was true all the time. It's just now it got so blatant and so open, unless a person is totally brain dead and has complete cognitive dissonance, you can't not see it. They just censored the governor of Florida who had a discussion with leading experts on shutting down all the restrictions in his state. They censor everything, and they're going into obsessive compulsive censorship mode to the extent that even that you can't. So I destroyed my channel. Then someone said to me, "What'd you do that? You cut off your nose to spite your face." I was going to shut down my Facebook page because I realized many of the people who were looking on YouTube and Facebook were not going to follow me to Gab, Twitter. Well, Twitter also shut down 4 accounts I had. I didn't waste time with them anymore. MeWe, USA Life, and a zillion other places. So I unshut my Facebook page before it got destroyed. And then now I reopened a YouTube channel where I am reloading the old videos because I'm a fanatic record keeper. So I have most of them on a computer somewhere, and I'm reloading that. So as far as going to Root and Branch, Les, Emanuel knows that the primary place, first of all, it's live feed right now to Root and Branch. Then it goes on your channel. And then we share the links in other places on the internet portals. So I don't know what David meant about a documentary. What is true is that we were going to have Emanuel on again today, which we did, and he was on before. That's true. I'm not aware of anyone anyone doing a documentary on me? There was a wonderful reporter. She disappeared. I hope she's right. Gail Lichtman, who wrote a lot of stories about what we did. Then she disappeared. I asked Steve Lynn, you know what happened to Gail? He doesn't even know. I look her up. I don't even see an obituary. She vanished. The lady vanishes. Hope she's all right.
Just read one thing from the live audience just to make sure. Carolyn
Right
Miller
ahead.
grew up in in San Francisco Bay Area, Catholic neighborhood. And she just recently did a DNA test and she's 28% Ashkenazic Jewish. And she was mentioning interesting things in the chat, and probably Mr. Rund, I know from my experience, you're working with Holocaust survivors and Jews. Most of the work is helping people like this reattach to their Judaism, simple things like teaching them Hebrew, how to light Sabbath candles, you like Chabad, and also connecting them with their family. And she said she has a grandfather named Budoff. So there's just a woman who found us on YouTube, Carolyn Miller, who has a Jewish grandfather named Budoff that had some interesting comments on YouTube. There's another guy, Red Godel three-way, that's making some comments, but he didn't divulge his personal information, just generic comments.
What we did do, I don't think I mentioned this to you or Jennifer in a private message, but you might know it. I haven't really publicized it, is I asked Emanuel and Roseanne Barr if they would co-chair a film fellowship of the Root and Branch Association. They both agreed. Now, when I use the term fellowship, it's not like giving out grants. It's maybe like a committee or a seminar. It's simply a place to gather information. And I'm very slow with everything I do, but the idea was to create a database. I created a little blog with good films on Jews, Judaism, and Israel. Now, there are a lot of those. So that's a work that's going to take a long time. This is just a concept. I'm now storing up information. I opened a number of little blogs, which are actually a book nursery, an idea. I get this question all the time. What is Root and Branch? Who are you? I had a Mossad agent, a real one, that said, now, who's behind this? I said, wait a minute, you're supposed to know all that. You can monitor all my conversation. I had the Minister of Justice back in 1995 when I was working with Mr. Christensen. Yes, I'll sign to your Jerusalem Embassy initiative, but who's behind this? Or what is this all about? And if I told, you see, the trouble is with telling people the truth is if it's not something they want to hear, they won't hear it. How did I start our Jerusalem Embassy initiative with Mr. Christensen? It was February 1995. I started to travel with him for his speaking engagements because he had resigned from the Nobel Prize Committee on a principle and gave up a pension, income he had from that. He wasn't a rich man. And over his coffee and my orange juice, sitting in the cafe in the Empire State Building, he said, I want to do something. I don't want to just be known because I resigned from a committee. I want to do something positive. Why don't we have a campaign to move the embassy to Jerusalem? Again, Root and Branch is a all volunteer, no staff, no money. Everyone has to be a volunteer, have their own source of income. It's all about the power of ideas. As Victor Hugo said, greater than the tramp of mighty armies is the power of an idea whose time has come. And we've dealt with powerful ideas. And in April 1995, I went with Mr. Christensen. I was in Washington, and we met Senator John Kyle, who had just become a senator. And that November, a week before Rabin's murder, Rabin was in Washington to celebrate the passage of the Jerusalem Embassy Relocation Act. And Mr. Christensen, I was in the office, he looked at Mr. Christensen like Moses walked in. He was much old enough to be Senator Kyle's father. It's like, I just was a congressman, now I'm a senator. You're the great Mr. Christensen, you're the president of Harlem, member of the Nobel Prize Committee. You did something based on principle. He said, I'm giving you my blessings to do what you do. And a couple of months later, the act was passed in November 95, and the embassy was moved in 2018. And again, I come back to a problem. I think I've discussed it with Les. I've certainly discussed it with Larry, is we believe in credit where credit is due. Senator Kyle wasn't there. He should have been the main speaker. It was his act. There were hundreds of people there. I don't even think anyone remembered, including President Trump. I don't think they intentionally excluded him. They just didn't know. Senator Lieberman was there. He knew. No one said a word. I have a problem with that. I have a problem with Emanuel Rund being the father of International Holocaust Remembrance Day. He should be on the council, the committee. But this gets back to a point that David Ogilvy, who founded Ogilvy and Mather, said. Brilliant. He was a Renaissance man, Scottish, high IQ, and from an aristocratic family too. They were rich. And he said, it is often said that mediocre men do not recognize men of achievement. He said, I, David Ogilvy, disagree. He said, I believe that mediocre men recognize men of achievement, resent them, and seek to destroy them. And one of the ways you can destroy people is saying, well, anonymous. What did the Germans do with Heinrich Heine's The Lorelei? It was too popular in Germany. It's anonymous.
A German
Emanuel
poet.
Emanuel knows it. There was what the poet laureate of Germany, but he's a Jew.
Right.
So I have a problem, as Les knows, in Root and Branch. Unless someone specifically requests anonymity, we always credit our sources. And it's all about ideas. And I get this all the time. One volunteer who worked with us was at a dinner years ago, Shabbat dinner, with the representative of an organization loaded with money, millions. He said, wow, you work with Ari at Root and Branch? You people must be loaded with money because look at all the press coverage you get. No, dummy. We get the press coverage because the people and the ideas have power. You can't buy that, as opposed to advertising. You want coverage if you didn't pay for it, like you gave someone tickets to the Knicks game or a weekend somewhere, you can buy it. It's called bribery. But in general, radio, TV, and print outlets, certainly back then, they want ideas that are interesting. We dealt with and deal with interesting ideas and interesting people. So they say, well, how do you do it? The answer is, as John Hulley said, that's another person Les knows, is that most companies, even the most efficient ones, operate at 1% of theoretical capacity. And this is the fallacy of misplaced concreteness in philosophy and psychology, is that, well, wallpaper isn't production. It's the Model T Ford that comes out of the factory. What goes on inside? People want to see, does the car work? And how much does it cost? So you can have, as we have in Jerusalem, Edifice Row, the Sphinxes, the Jewish disease, edifices, all up and down King George Street. And now a bigger one from the Simon Wiesenthal Center. It's almost the size of the World Trade Center. That's wonderful. But what are you producing? Films, books, something. If you don't produce it, it's just the Sphinx and a pyramid. And that's another problem I have with rich Jews who financed museums in Europe, and especially Eastern Europe. Another museum with dead people? I mean, like the SS wanted to have a museum of the extinct Jewish people in Prague. So you think we're extinct? And you're going to build another museum and a museum. And now after Gush Katif was destroyed, and there was a great deal of jealousy in that, why it was destroyed. To have a museum for Gush Katif? What's wrong with Jews? We need to have kids like the Haredim do and the Mizrahi. We need more Israelite warrior princes and princesses, not more museums. Really, as my father said, he said, you know what? Don't be so hard on your fellow Jews because they're dealing with, it's programmed into your spiritual genetics to be a victim, to be a bug, to be a bacteria. When you've been told by your host culture, that's what you are for centuries, you start to believe it by yourself. So, well, we'll have museums. Skip the museums, have the kids. All right. So no, I don't remember Emanuel saying, if you want to do a documentary on Root and Branch, I'm not sure what it would be. You're welcome to. Yeah, we did get a lot of press coverage. Do we now? I'm not really looking for it. I don't even need it. We have our own outlets now. And as Les knows, since the Israel Center got shut down for a whole year, we were forced to learn how to use Zoom. And it's very nice with Zoom. I have a program coming up with 50 people signed up. That's the B'nai Anusim. I have to send that to you, Emanuel. I didn't know you're from Iberio Jewish. That's Yafa DaCosta. She has her chevra. So Zoom is wonderful. You have all the people can sign up. And then thanks to David and Jennifer linking it up with YouTube, you have the people in the chat zone.
Yeah, let me mention real quick, just because this woman's been here for a few hours, Christina Shepard from Minnesota. I think she says she's part American Indian Anawabi tribe. And she took your information, Mr. Run, and wants to contact you. She says she wants to help, and she's planning on visiting Israel. Christina Shepard from Minneapolis.
Very nice. By the way, talking about the museums, Lowell, one project that I'm planning, can you hear me?
Yep.
One project that I'm planning is to make a film about the Jews of Berlin who contributed to Berlin and Germany, including my grandfather, Max Emanuel Wund. He and his brothers organized soup kitchens for the poor people of Berlin. They gave money to the museums and hospitals besides the Jewish community. My grandfather was killed by the Gestapo 37 because he didn't want to sign over his imperium to the Nazis. I want this film to be shown in America to show our brothers and sisters who contribute to every cause in America that has nothing to do with Judaism altogether, that they should do it in Israel. Hospitals, if they want from museums, that's okay too, but to schools and education, as you said, Lowell. And so that's one project that I'm planning to do about, Haratzachta vegam yarashta. You got everything from the Jews for 2,000 years. We always had the Stadlan who had to go to the Poritz and to give him all the jewelry, all the gold. Just leave us, let us live. And then he got all the money and killed all the Jews. So I want American Jews to know that Lo leolam chosen, the strength is not forever. Jews of America are not going to keep strength all for the next 1,000 years. At some point from now and in the future, all those people that they contribute to will come again. Against them from the different groups, and I don't even have to mention. And so that will be one project to show American Jews. And yeah.
Well, awesome. That's what I'm here trying to help Lowell and Les be able to use the technology to reach as many people as possible. If it's applicable, I'm happy to help you also, Mr. Run, if you don't have a tech assistant or if you're interested in live streaming or social media.
Okay. Yishar koach. Yishar koach.
Yeah, my honor,
Okay.
my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so I just want to thank Emanuel and Lowell and David and everybody who's contributed so wonderful to this incredible evening. And Emanuel, your presentation was riveting. It really was riveting. It was very, very special, and we were honored to hear what you had to say and your experience. And like Lowell said, you really should be recognized even much more because of your incredible achievements, what you've done and the people that you've met. And you're a tactless man. You not only don't speak, but you walk the walk. You really have achieved incredible things. I've seen some of the movies that you've made, and they are absolutely phenomenal. And we really need to get your name more out there. And thank God, since you've come to Israel, I think it's really moving in the right direction. But we really are honored to have had you tonight, and we really want to thank Lowell for putting this together. And really, we cannot thank you enough. We are extremely grateful for you giving of your precious time to be with us. And David, thank you, and Jennifer for making it live stream as well. And I just feel very honored to be part of this as well. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you for the kind words, and thank you, Lowell, and thank you, David. And Am Yisrael Chai, we do it all for Am Yisrael.
Am Yisrael Chai.
Absolutely. Am Yisrael Chai.
And let's have a good Chodesh. And
yes, Chodesh Tov,
yeah.
Tov, everyone. And thank you so much.
Yeah,
Okay. All the best. Bye-bye.
sure.
Yeah, thanks again. Come again. Inform us. A few months or whenever you have a time to speak again to us.
Wonderful. Emanuel, sure. And I just want to also just mention that if people can get the Jerusalem report, it's got Steve Lindy's the editor, and he wrote a magnificent piece on you, Emanuel.
Yeah, he did.
It was
It's actually
really
behind a
wonderful.
paywall. I was looking it up, but I think it's behind a paywall. You have to be a subscriber.
Okay, so those in Israel, you can actually buy the Jerusalem Report. It's a wonderful magazine. It really is. Steve
Yeah,
Lindley used to
it
be the editor of the Jerusalem Post, and because of his commitments, he's downsized a little bit. But now he's the editor of the Jerusalem Report, and it's phenomenal. And
yeah.
it's a great cover that you richly deserve, Emmanuel. You really do.
Yeah, thank you.
All the best.
And
Okay.
Professor
Okay.
Ben said,
Bye bye.
Professor Ben said was also honored to be part of this, but he had to leave out without being able to tell you.
Okay. Wonderful.